At 0340 local time, two Iranian F-4 Phantoms lifted off from Mehrabad Air Base and turned south. The contact they were chasing was an American MQ-1 Predator, running a standard surveillance pattern off Iran's coastline at roughly 110 knots. Slow, unarmed, and alone. The Iranian pilots climbed toward intercept altitude and pushed their throttles forward. What they didn't know, and what nobody on the ground had told them, was that the Predator wasn't alone at all. Somewhere in the dark airspace above them, close enough to read their instrument panels, was an F-22 Raptor, and it had been there for several minutes already. The F-4 Phantom first entered American service in the early 1960s. Twin General Electric J-79 engines, top speed around 1,500 miles per hour. A radar system designed when vacuum tubes were still considered modern technology. Iran acquired its fleet during the Shah era, before 1979, before the arms embargo locked the door on every spare part, every software update, every maintenance contract. The jets that scrambled that night were roughly 50 years old, flying on cannibalized components, kept airborne by a supply chain built around smuggled parts and shell companies. The Islamic Republic had been keeping these airframes alive through sheer institutional stubbornness. Impressive in the way that keeping a 1974 pickup running on salvaged parts is impressive, less useful in a gunfight. The Raptor shadowing them above was something else entirely. The F-22 entered operational service in 2005 after 2 decades of development and roughly $66 billion in program costs. It cruises at supercruise, meaning it sustains supersonic flight without afterburner at around Mach 1.5. It carries an AN/APG-77 active electronically scanned array radar that can track dozens of targets simultaneously while broadcasting almost nothing detectable. Its radar cross-section, the size it appears on enemy radar, is roughly equivalent to a steel marble. The F-4s had no idea it existed. The geometry of the intercept favored the Raptor so completely that the word intercept barely applies. The Iranian pilots thought they were hunting. They were being observed. The Raptor pilot descended below the lead F-4, slipped underneath the fuselage, close enough to catalog the weapons load on the hard points. 2 aircraft, their crews scanning the darkness for the drone, their radar systems pinging into empty airspace, while an adversary read their wing pylons from below. The sensor suite on the Raptor was cataloging everything: engine output, weapons configuration, formation spacing. The F-4 crew was flying blind in the most literal operational sense. Then the Raptor pulled up alongside the lead aircraft, still unseen, still silent. At that point, the tactical outcome of any engagement was already written. The Raptor pilot broke radio silence. The message, stripped to its operational core, was 3 words: "Go home now." The F-4s listened. They broke off the intercept, turned northwest, and returned to Mehrabad. The Predator continued its patrol. No shots fired, no missiles launched. The entire encounter lasted minutes and resolved without a single weapon leaving a rail. That's what one-sided air superiority looks like when it's working correctly. Not a dogfight. A conversation where only one party knows the other is present. That was 2013. The technological gap between that moment and today hasn't narrowed. It's widened. Iran has spent the intervening years under sanctions, without access to Western avionics, without a reliable pipeline for modern fighter components, without a single operational 5th-generation aircraft. The Iranian Air Force fields roughly 500 aircraft total, by most open-source estimates, and the actual number mission capable at any given moment is significantly lower. Cannibalizing one jet to keep 3 others flying is standard practice. The fleet is a paper number. The real number is what can actually get airborne, complete a combat mission, and land with functional systems. That number is smaller. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Air Force operates separately from the regular Iranian Air Force, with overlapping command structures and independent procurement channels. What both branches share is an almost total absence of anything that would register as a modern threat to an F-22 formation. The most advanced Iranian fighter, by most assessments, is the F-14 Tomcat, another Shah-era American aircraft, now modified with domestic components after the originals became unavailable. Iran has been attempting to domestically manufacture replacement radar systems and avionics for the Tomcat fleet since the 1980s. The results have been inconsistent. An F-14 with jury-rigged Iranian avionics flying against a Raptor is not a contest. It's a geometry problem with a predetermined answer. The answer has always been asymmetric. If you can't match a weapon system directly, you find the engagement envelope where it doesn't perform optimally, and you push there. Iran figured this out. The drone doctrine that Tehran has been developing for roughly 2 decades is not a consolation prize. It's a deliberate strategic response to permanent air inferiority. The Shahed 136, a one-way attack drone roughly the size of a riding lawnmower, costs somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000, depending on the production run. An AIM-120 AMRAAM, the standard beyond visual range air-to-air missile carried by American fighters, costs approximately $1.2 million per unit. You do not need a defense budget to understand that exchange rate is unsustainable at scale. In April 2024, Iran launched over 80 Shahed drones toward Israel in a single coordinated package, alongside ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. American F-15Es and F-16S intercepted most of the drones, and Allied aircraft handled additional contacts. The operation cost Iran relatively little in manufacturing terms. The intercept cost the defending coalition substantially more per kill. That math is Iran's entire air warfare argument, not F-4s versus Raptors. Swarms of cheap expendable airframes forcing expensive responses from a force that cannot ignore them. When the F-22s deployed to the region in August 2024, the threat picture they were briefed on was not a formation of Iranian fighters somewhere at altitude waiting for a merge. It was a distributed, low-slow drone threat operating at the edge of what high-performance sensors are optimized to detect. The AN/APG-77 is built for aerial threats moving fast. A Shahed drone doing 110 knots at low altitude with a radar cross-section that already challenges detection requires different tracking solutions than an adversary fighter climbing to intercept altitude at Mach 1. The Raptor pilots adapted. That's what the deployment produced. Revised tactics, different sensor employment, updated engagement parameters for contacts that don't behave like the threat the airframe was designed to defeat. After April 2024, Iran made a decision. When it struck Israel again in October, the drone packages were gone. Only ballistic missiles. The Shahed swarm strategy that had looked clever in April had been answered, and the Iranians drew a reasonable operational conclusion. If the F-22s and their allied counterparts can handle the drones, stop sending drones into that air defense architecture. The adjustment was tactically sensible. It was also a data point. Iran changed its approach specifically because the coalition air defense response had worked. The Raptors demonstrated performance modified Iranian decision-making without a single shot being fired in that direction. By February 2026, the calculation had shifted again. Operation Epic Fury began at 0710 local time with Tomahawk salvos from American destroyers in the Gulf. 11 F-22 Raptors had forward deployed to Avda Air Base in southern Israel days earlier. First time American combat aircraft had ever operated from Israeli soil in a declared combat posture. Alongside them, KC-135 and KC-46 tankers to extend range across the operational theater. The Raptors weren't there to chase Shaheds. They were there for a different mission entirely. Air superiority over a contested airspace where Iranian air defense systems, not fighter aircraft, represented the primary threat to the strike package. Iran's air defense network is layered. After Israeli strikes dismantled most of the Russian-supplied S-300 batteries in October 2024, Iranian engineers spent 2 years building a domestic replacement. The system, roughly 150 kilometers engagement range, positioned in the Zagros and Alborz mountain corridors to cover the western and southern approaches. SA-65 in Western designation, a genuine engineering accomplishment under sanctions conditions. But a phased array radar, regardless of how well it's built, has a fundamental problem. It has to emit to search, and passive sensors on aircraft with the F-22's electronic warfare suite can detect and geolocate that emission while broadcasting nothing in return. The SA-65 network represented a significant improvement over what Iran had fielded previously. The Iranians had learned lessons from every major air campaign of the past 2 decades, studying Israeli operations against Syrian air defenses in 2017 and 2018, analyzing Russian systems in Ukraine, understanding the vulnerability envelope that modern electronic warfare exploits. The system incorporated redundancy, used mountain terrain for radar shadowing and protection, and distributed command nodes across a wider geographic footprint than older systems. The engineering team that built it under international sanctions deserved professional credit. What they built was the best possible version of a system architecture that has inherent limitations. No amount of engineering can overcome the fund, a mental problem that emitters can be located and attacked. The Iranians knew this. They built it anyway, because the alternative was no air defense at all. They also understood that when the strikes came, the SA-65 would absorb the initial coalition attention and potentially degrade some of the attack precision. Nothing more. The Raptors flew escort for the strike packages entering western Iranian airspace. F-35s running passive EW suites cataloged every radar emission below. The SA-65 batteries that activated to track the formation broadcast their coordinates to everything listening. An EA-18G Growler off the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Air Wing caught the first emission from a battery in the mountains west of Kerman. The Growler's ALQ-99 jamming system isn't subtle. It's a fist applied to the electromagnetic spectrum. The battery's ability to track and engage dropped proportionally. HARM missiles followed the radar emissions back to their source. The system that Iran spent 2 years building to guard the western corridor went quiet within minutes of the strike package's arrival. Iranian F-4s and F-14 remained on the ground. That choice was not accidental. Scrambling aging airframes against a formation that includes F-22s running stealth approach in an airspace where radar coverage is already degraded is not a tactical option. It's a way to lose aircraft and pilots to an engagement they'll never see coming. The Iranian air defense commanders knew the 2013 geometry. They knew what happens when you send F-4s toward a Raptor that doesn't want to be found. The decision not to fight in the air was itself a form of engagement. a recognition that the air superiority layer had already been conceded. The Air Force commanders briefing the political leadership understood the implications. Every successful interception of a Shahed drone in 2024 had demonstrated American and Allied capability in the contested airspace. Every October missile strike showed that ballistic weapons could penetrate the barrier, but at unsustainable strategic cost. The February offensive confirmed what the officers already knew. The Air Force could not defend the nation against a modern peer air power. What remained was damage limitation and endurance. Keep enough aircraft flying to maintain a deterrent against local threats. Accept that the high-end fight was lost before it started. Focus resources on the air defense system as a delaying mechanism and a tool for negotiations rather than as a viable combat architecture. What Iran could contest was the ground-based layer. SAMs, radar-guided anti-aircraft guns, shoulder-fired infrared missiles. The dense network around Tehran and along the Gulf Coast made every approach corridor expensive in terms of countermeasure expenditure and threat reaction time. The F-35s rolling in on the Ministry of Defense and the IRGC command facilities were operating inside a radar coverage picture that the Growlers and the Raptors had been systematically degrading for 40-plus minutes before bombs came off the rails. The architecture that Iran built to compensate for its absent air force was the actual target of the first hour. The IRGC fast attack boat fleet was a parallel problem with a similar answer. Iran had spent 4 decades threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz with swarming boat tactics. 50-foot hulls armed with machine guns and rocket launchers, operating in packs of 100, designed to overwhelm tanker traffic and coalition warships through volume. The boats at Calais-Yeganj and Bandar Abbas sat in hardened concrete shelters with half-moon roofs built to deflect shrapnel, not GBU-31 JDAM rounds hitting with the force of 2,000 pounds of high explosive and hardened steel. F-15E Strike Eagles from the 48th Fighter Wing put bombs through those roofs from 18,000 feet. The shelters that were supposed to protect the swarm boats became the problem. Overpressure with nowhere to go. Walls out are oof down, boats under concrete. The fast attack boat strategy had consumed enormous resources over 40 years. Iran maintained roughly 250 such boats distributed across the Gulf, the Sea of Oman, and the Caspian. The tactics were sound in theory. Volume of attacking platforms overwhelms point defenses. Small radar cross-section makes detection difficult at range. Shallow draft allows operations in confined waters where large coalition ships cannot maneuver effectively. But tactics without the operational freedom to execute are just textbooks. The coalition air campaign established that freedom in the first hours. 3 major boat bases hit hard, shelters destroyed, boats damaged or lost, logistics disrupted. The IRGC Navy would spend weeks assessing the damage before attempting any meaningful operations. The Chabahar submarine piers took Tomahawk hits at 0812, and Super Hornets from VFA 41 Black Aces followed 40 minutes later. A Kilo-class submarine that gets to sea in the Strait of Hormuz can lay mines in shipping lanes too shallow for easy sweep, hiding inside commercial traffic patterns where detection is difficult. The piers, the dry dock, the fuel storage, the mine handling facilities, all designated as priority targets for exactly that reason. A submarine that can't be fueled, repaired, or armed with mines is a steel tube sitting on the bottom accomplishing nothing. By mid-morning local time, the IRGC Navy's fast attack headquarters at Bandar Abbas had taken multiple strikes. Asaluya and Chabahar had been hit. the radar-guided coastal defense missile battery on the bluff above Chabahar, the C-802 launcher that could threaten coalition ships in the Gulf of Oman, was gone. 2 GBU-39 small-diameter bombs from a Super Hornet wingman. The carrier air wing still had weapons on the rails when the coastal picture went quiet. No IRGC boats sorted from any of the Gulf Coast bases. The threat that Iran had spent 4 decades developing and publicizing as its asymmetric answer to American naval power sat behind burning fuel storage and collapsed shelter roofs while the Strait of Hormuz ran open and uncontested below.